We're going to be doing a few different ways to decoupage onto glass, metal, and wood. We're going to be using fabric, paper decoupage, napkins, and scrapbooking paper. Stay tuned. I've got some awesome projects coming up for you guys, and we're going to start out with this cute little pair of scoopers. This came with a vintage set. It seems like it's probably from the 70s, a couple bowls, and a few of these, and I thought that it would be cute to turn these into some decor. First, I'm going to go ahead and start out with and add some white just to the center of these. I want to keep that natural wood around the center and not do anything but give that a little bit of wax. I want to thank you all for joining me in this video. I hope you do stay tuned. I've got a couple of really great projects coming up. I mean, there's several, but there's a box that I really love, so you won't be disappointed. Now, I want to go ahead and throw out some disclaimers. I do have a few tech issues in this video. There is a little bit of flickering and a couple of small areas of blurring, but nothing that you won't see for very long. And if it is something that's super important, it will be repeated in other processes. Now we're going to use this beautiful butterfly napkin. I'm going to show you how to go around these without cutting. I want the edges to be torn so they blend in nicely with that white paint. You can cut around these and get a straight line. And I will show you that in another project that I do because I don't want the torn edges. But for this one, I'm doing a white background with a napkin that is surrounded in white, so the torn edges of white is not going to matter or show up. What I'm doing right now is separating my napkin. You want to make sure you get every layer off of there and only have one layer. Now I'm taking a small paintbrush and some water and just tracing around my little butterfly. Then we are going to just gently tear around all of the edges to get the butterfly out of that square box and mostly keep its shape and not much of that white napkin around it. We're going to be doing the wet on wet method here, and that is putting some Mod Podge on the paint and then laying our butterfly down and then adding wet Mod Podge on top of this. You can get wrinkles doing this. I just smooth mine out to the best of my ability. I don't get too crazy about wrinkles because most of my projects are thrifted, upcycled to look vintage anyways. Once I get this completely sealed, all that white paint with the Mod Podge, I'm going to take my sandpaper and go just around that little edge where I got a little bit of white paint up too far. And I'm going to take my DIY dark wax and go over this whole piece of wood to minimize the scratches and the wear. I didn't show that on camera. As you can see, these things just turned out looking new after I added that wax. And what I wanted to do was just take my wax brush and go around the edges to give a definition around that white, it blending into the wood. I didn't add any additional wax to the brush. I just used what was on it. I think I'm going to drill a little hole in the top of these and add some twine so that someone could hang these if they wanted to. Let me know what you all think of these in the comments below. I love how these turned out. And of course, I'm a super fan of green, so they are one of my favorites. We're going to be using another one of ROYCYCLED's decoupage papers. I will have these listed in the comment section below if you want to see what the names of them are. I'm going to use this clear glass plate that I had in my stash. You can get glass from the Dollar Tree, these plates for $1.25. They are so easy to do a decoupage on. I decided I wanted to use these crowns, and of course they were in the center of the paper, so I'm just using my plate as a reference to trim around with a marker, and then I'm going to cut that out. Still using the wet on wet method for this one, I am going to go ahead and spray my paper with some water before I add it to this plate. Now, it's great to mist the paper. It helps stretch the fibers and helps it to decrease wrinkles. The issue is I oversaturated my paper for one, and I put a lot of Mod Podge on there, which was my intention, but I should not have oversaturated the paper, so just keep that in mind. And you will get wrinkles unless you cut your paper into like pie shapes, and I didn't want to do that and break up the pattern, so I just lived with the wrinkles. So we're just going to drop this on top of here and smooth it as best as we can. Once I got that smoothed out, I just set it to the side and let it dry completely. We're going to bring that back and we're going to sand off those edges. Now you can use scissors and cut it, but I find sanding gives such a clean edge and I love the way that it looks. So that's what we're doing on this one. Once we get that sanded off, I'm going to go ahead and put a coat of white paint on the back of this, let that dry, and then seal in that white paint with some type of sealer. You don't necessarily need to seal this paint, especially if it has a top coat in it and you're not going to be handling this plate. I'm going to be putting this in my booth, so I want to get that sealed. Now I'm adding some rub and buff to the edge of this. This is just a little bit blurry coming up, and again, I do apologize, but I wanted to include just a snippet to show you that I did it. Here are the photos. Let me know what you think of this one. This next project is one of my favorites. It's this really old box that I'm going to be using this gorgeous recycled decoupage paper on. I'm using some text and a butterfly to match with the green that's inside of the box. Now, what I do is I go ahead and cut out that paper and apply it. I did not get that on camera, but I wanted to let you know that in advance. First, we need to remove this eagle. I'm going to be saving that for a possible project in the future. This has some gorgeous fluffy leather on it and some rivets. We are going to cover that up, but it does help to give this an almost leather-like feel with the paper that we put on it. I cleaned this box really well because it looks like it was in storage and quite grungy. Then I added some white paint on top of just this square or rectangle. I do get a little bit onto the wood, but we're going to be painting that too, so it doesn't really matter. But I give this just a good thick coat and I let this completely dry. Add my decoupage paper with the wet method like we've already done twice. Then we're going to go ahead and paint the box black. We're going to be using this Fusion with a top coat in it already, black paint. I want to just go around the edge of that decoupage paper and kind of get down in those crevices with that black paint too. I use a small brush to do that, and I'm going to paint the bottom of this, the sides, and the inside lip of the box. I do go ahead and give this 2 full coats to get that really good coverage. I liked how the wood was showing through on the first coat, but I didn't want that on this project. But think about that when you are doing projects. Sometimes a see-through of the wood actually gives a really beautiful look. And here we are just taking that little paintbrush, going down in all those edges and kind of around the corners a little bit to give it that shadow look with that black paint. I thought we would use some rub and buff on this to highlight the copper color in this butterfly. So I brought out that autumn gold color. I'm going around the metal with this and just kind of around the edges and hitting some of those indentions, not covering the whole piece or getting a lot on there. I do get a little heavy in some places, so I took my black wax and just kind of toned it back a little bit because I felt like it was quite bright in some places. I know we talk about this all the time on this channel, that you can always fix mistakes for the most part, and this is kind of how I'm doing that, is toning some of that back to get that brightness down. I thought about adding legs to this, but I didn't. I'm going to keep it the tradition of the box, but if it doesn't sell, I'm going to put it in my booth, even though it's one of my favorite and I would love to keep it. I'm going to put it in my booth, and if it doesn't sell, I may go ahead and add some legs to this. I was also worried about putting screws in the base of it. What do y'all think about this one? Our next project is fairly simple, and it's just a little frame, but it's a great way to show you all how to decoupage on glass again and to use fabric. Now I have this gorgeous fabric. I've had it for a few years. I bought it during my journaling days, and I want to use these stamp-like images, so I just used my piece of glass from my frame to cut those out, and I'm going to use the Mod Podge method, putting a lot on the glass, making sure it's saturated, adding my fabric, and then saturating my fabric. That's what's going to keep this stuck to this piece, and then also make the fabric look gorgeous with the Mod Podge on top. Although I love the natural wood color of this frame, I wanted to paint this that creamy color that's in the fabric, so I'm giving this a coat of the Fusion Champlain. It's actually 2 coats, letting that dry. And then I'm going to add some wax to this because I want to put a little bit of dark wax down in those beads, but I don't want it to be real noticeable, and so I'm protecting the crevices with this wax so that it don't get too dark with the dark wax. And I'm just going to use the same brush with a little bit of wax already on it, go around those beads, and then wipe back the excess. I'm going to put this back together, and this piece is finished. You all will have to let me know what you think about this one. I thought we would do another odd surface on the next project, so we're going to be using this vintage rolling pin. I've already painted this a cream color. I started it for another project and just never finished it. And this is a gorgeous decoupage paper that I thought matched the handles quite well. But to be honest, when I finished with it, I thought it was a little matchy-matchy. But I did not want to paint those handles because they just showed the age and the vintageness of them. Let me know, would you have painted the handles a different color? So what I did was I just kind of decided what I wanted to show on my rolling pin, and I took my water and traced out on the paper and then tore it because I don't want a complete straight edge once I get this rolled around on the rolling pin. The way we're going to do this is start on the end, or the very top of this, add a little bit of Mod Podge and attach the edge of the paper, and continue to add Mod Podge while rolling the paper around. Now I did go ahead and spray this a little bit with water so it would roll even better around this. I lost a little bit of footage there at the beginning, but you're going to see plenty of this technique to get the gist of it. So I just continue to add the Mod Podge underneath and smooth out on top until I get all the way around, and then I tear off the excess. I don't want a straight line on this. Once I get this finished, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then we're going to use some sandpaper and sand the edges of this off. I saw some really dark black spots on here too, and I wanted to go ahead and sand them just a little. I just didn't want them as bright. They definitely are the antique vintage look from this, or the vintage look of being used. So I left them to a point, but sand off the darkest of on the top layer. Once I sanded the edges of the paper off and those ends, I went ahead and sealed those with just a matte clear coat to get that kind of sanded look off of there and have it sealed. Now that this is finished, let me know if this is too matchy-matchy, or if you would have just went ahead and painted those handles. Are they a little bit too distressed for you? Let me know in the comments below. Our next project is going to be using some scrapbooking paper. Now it's not cardstock, but it does have the print on one side. I'm going to show you how to use this to decoupage on these spoons. Even though we are going to be removing some of the back layer of this, it's still a little bit thick, but I wanted to show you that you could still use it on a curved surface. I'm just cutting out some of these sort of vintage faded looking flowers to use on these spoon heads. I love to do these. People love to just buy these in my booth and display them in their kitchens for a vintage feel. So if you're going to use this scrapbook paper for like a curved surface or not a flat surface, I would definitely recommend removing some of the back side of the paper. If this was a flat surface, it really wouldn't be necessary because it's not going to matter. But what I want to do is get some of that paper off the back, so we're going to use just some clear packing tape, lay it on in strips, and then I'm going to take my roll of tape to burnish that tape on there really good. Why I want to do that is because I want the corner or the edge of this tape to pick up that edge of the paper. Once I get that good and burnished, I'm just going to peel it back slowly and watch it pull the thickest layer that it can off onto that tape. Now, if you're using double-sided tape or double-sided pattern paper, save this tape because it's going to have a gorgeous pattern on it, and you can use that on other projects, especially in your journal. You can use it like stickers. It's really cool. So now that this is a lot thinner, as you can see, we're going to just cut our pattern out using our fingers or hands to kind of put it down in there. You can do this with like your nail, or I go ahead and flip it over and use a pen to draw out the shape. Before we add our paper, we're going to go ahead and use that white paint to paint only in the scoop area of these spoons because I want to leave them the natural wood color. To be honest, with this paper still being quite thicker with a white back, I'm really not sure that this step was necessary, but I'm just so used to doing it, I didn't even think about it. And once I get that white paint dry, I am now adding the clear Mod Podge, and then I'm just gonna wet my paper a tad because it's still thin, and the water will help it to be soft and mold more into that scoop. After I do this, I'm gonna let both of these dry, and they get kind of crispy, so you can sand the edges off to make it look more of a blended piece. I go around the edges of that paper just a tad with that little dark wax brush, add a little edging of color to that, and then tie a couple little natural looking bows on here. Well, not bows, but little knots to finish these off. These have such a country faded feel. These are not my favorite out of this project, but they did serve a purpose of showing how to use scrapbook paper on kind of an odd surface with decoupage. And I love the creamy knots on them. They remind me a little bit of a shabby country, or maybe a little bit of shabby chic. Let me know what you all think of these. I've had this wood round in my stash for a while. I thrifted it. I think I paid like $3 for this. I pick these up whenever I see them. I think this was homemade because it's kind of a weird shape. But I'm putting a good coat of white paint on here because we're going to be decoupaging on this. I'm going to be using the iron-on method. So I'm getting my white paint on there. We're going to let it dry and then add a thick coat of Mod Podge and let that dry. Now that our Mod Podge has dried, we're going to lay this brick-looking decoupage paper on here. I'm going to use my little mini press, and I'm going to go over this very well with a piece of parchment paper on top of this paper. You literally get no wrinkles. And what that's going to do is reheat the Mod Podge underneath by making it adhere to the back of my decoupage paper. The only issue that I have with this is, unless you choose not to seal paper after you do this iron-on method, you are still going to get some type of bubbling or wrinkling. Now, it may not be as bad because you have a flat surface when you start. And after you seal your paper or any paper, it does have a little bit of bubbling that will lay back down on its own as it dries. So that's just kind of my interpretation of the iron-on method. Now we're gonna, I went ahead and sanded those edges off, and we're gonna be using some more of this baby animals, and I'm gonna be using a cute little raccoon off of here to add to this brick background. I already used the water method and tore around the image and painted the back of this image white because I want to make sure the brick doesn't show through onto my raccoon. I added some Mod Podge to lay my raccoon down on, and then I'm just going to smooth the little raccoon really good and Mod Podge over him. I mostly just use my hands to smooth him out, and then I grab a little fan brush and put a good layer of Mod Podge over top of him to seal him in. Let that dry, and I do the sanding on the edges. Now I thought that we would kind of blend our little raccoon in. I kind of wish I would put a light gray color on the back of him instead of that bright white, because it would have blended in better with the background. But I am learning still. I do a project later that has use buff as the background because I recognize that white is not always the best color. So I'm using this old and gray DIY. It's kind of a clear gray liquid patina. It's a sealer in itself, and I'm going to go over this little raccoon and some areas of the brick to give it that hint of gray and blend it in with that background. If you don't have this, I would take some gray paint and mix it with a clear sealer such as Mod Podge or your clear coat, whatever you use, just a tiny bit to give your clear sealer a hint of gray, because that's kind of what this is. And you can do this with any paint. You could take a blue paint and add it to clear sealer to give your clear sealer just a hint of blue, and so on and so forth with any color. To add in some of the sort of brown tones that the little raccoon has in it, I go ahead and grab my Fusion in Antique and Glaze and do the same thing, kind of adding it in like I did the gray, patting it, and just getting it to the color that I want. I do all of this on the edges too with the gray and that antique clear coat from Fusion. Let that dry, And I give this a complete matte seal because that Fusion Antiquing Glaze is very shiny and I don't like it. So to make it matte, I just add a clear matte top coat to it. And this little guy is done. I add a hanger to the back of him. You'll have to let me know what you think about this one. This last and final project I did a full video on, and if you want to see the full process, I will have the link at the end of this video for you to watch it. I will be doing the faster version here. I wanted to show you all this pan that I picked up from a Goodwill bins. It was, of course, headed for the trash, so we're going to save this and use this ROYCYCLED paper in corrugated metal. I'm going to be using Mod Podge initially to start out for this. I'm going to put it onto the pan and let it dry, and then we're going to use the iron-on method. After we do that iron-on method, I go ahead and give the pan a good coat of DIY Skeleton Key, which is kind of a gray-green, and I thought it would be a great base color to start out with this. Once I do that, I will need to seal that DIY paint to get its true color because it does not have a sealer in it. Once I finish that, I'm going to go ahead and grab any colors that I have in my stash that match the colors in this paper. I do have a little bit of blurry here, but it goes away pretty quick. The reason I'm getting these colors out is because we are going to be blending these all around the pan to make this paper look like it is seamless with the pan. As I start mixing these colors, you will see that they start looking similar to the colors that's in this paper. I'm going to be adding the lighter color coming up to make it look like that gray around the pan to give it more of an oxide look. Like I said, the full version of this will be linked in the description box below, and it is on my YouTube channel. After I kind of get that light gray on there, I'm going to go ahead and start adding these sort of green grays to give some warmer tones to this, and I'm going to add the cinnamon colors and the chocolates to mimic the brown striping to pull that striping down onto the bottom and top of the pan. As I do this, I will be adding cinnamon to give a texture and that rust effect look. I go ahead and continue adding colors in between the striping to mimic the look and the texture, as well as the little tiny spots, striations with different colors of paint. After I get it completely how I look, I'm going to go ahead and add a little cute set of chicks from the ROYCYCLED Baby Animals. We've already used this before in this video, and I'm going to cut around these so I can get a good edge. I don't want a torn edge on this one. I'm going to use some Mod Podge to put this down. Before I do though, I did paint the back of this with a buff color instead of that bright white because we want a aged look. I add that, I seal it with a Mod Podge, and then I take that paint around the bottom of the paper to blend it in with the other colors. Even though we used that buff paint, I still felt that these little chicks was too bright, so I added some of that Fusion Antiquing Glaze to this, and then of course seal this completely with a matte finish. Once this dries, this piece looks so cool. You guys will have to let me know what you think about this in the comments below. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment. It does help, and I can bring you more content like this. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.